You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In this chilling origin story, we hear the first-hand account of a man who died, but didn't move on. Instead, he awoke trapped between worlds, drawn to the dying, compelled to collect their souls. What begins as a tragic, emotional journey quickly descends into something far darker, as his humanity fades and something ancient takes its place. Told in a grounded, cinematic style, this is a terrifying look at how the hunter of the afterlife was born. If you love real-feel supernatural horror stories with immersive sound, emotional depth, and unforgettable twists, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because at Soul Studios, we don't just tell scary stories. We tell the ones that follow you home. I remember the night I died with startling clarity. It was past midnight on a deserted stretch of highway as I drove home from a double shift at the hospital. Rain pelted my windshield and my eyes were heavy from exhaustion. One moment I was squinting at the road ahead, the next I saw headlights suddenly swerving into my lane. There was a deafening screech of tires and a blinding flash as metal met metal. Pain exploded through my body. The steering wheel crushed against my chest and I tasted blood. My car's interior lights flickered madly, casting staccato flashes across shattered glass and twisted steel. In those frantic seconds, sound became muffled. I heard my own heartbeat thudding in my ears, and a distant whisper of a voice. Or perhaps it was just the hiss of the broken radio. Silence fell then, an eerie quiet broken only by the drip of leaking oil and the faint hum of a dying engine. As I gazed through one half-shattered headlight, I realized I was staring at my phone on the passenger seat, still open to a photo of my family that I'd been too distracted to call. A wave of regret and sorrow hit me harder than the impact had. I tried to cling to that image, my wife's smile, our little girl waving at me, but my vision blurred. Warm blood trickled down my forehead and everything around me started to dim. A cold chill crept into my limbs. My fingers slackened their grip on the wheel. I could faintly make out figures rushing toward the wreck, the other driver maybe, or passerbys. Their voices panicked but oddly distant. My world was fading into dark corners. With a shuddering breath, I realized I was dying. Fear, confusion, and a strange calm all washed over me at once. My last thoughts were a desperate plea. I'm not ready. Please, I'm not ready. Then, with one final ragged exhale, I closed my eyes. The world fell silent and the pain ceased. The night that had begun like any other ended with me leaving my broken body behind. I died on that rain-slicked road, never imagining that death was only the beginning of my nightmare. I didn't simply vanish after that final breath. Instead, I opened my eyes again to find myself still on that road, standing outside the crumpled ruin of my car. The rain had stopped, and I realized I felt no drops on my skin at all. I felt nothing. I turned and saw my own body still slumped in the driver's seat, pale and bloody. A paramedic was checking my neck for a pulse with urgent concentration. I stumbled backward, horrified. How was I seeing this? I tried to scream, to tell them I was right here, but no sound left my throat. The paramedic shook his head slowly, and I watched as they draped a plastic sheet over my face. One of them muttered, "He's gone," under his breath. I was looking at myself from the outside. A surreal, stomach-turning realization set in. I was dead, and yet I remained. Panicking, I ran toward the cluster of EMTs and bystanders, waving my arms, shouting, but they ignored me completely. One woman actually looked straight through me, her expression one of pity as she gazed at my covered corpse. I reached out in desperation to grab her shoulder, to beg for help or comfort or something, and my hand passed right through her, as if she were made of mist, or as if I was. An icy dread settled over me. I felt untethered, weightless, like a balloon caught in a breeze. The paramedics carefully lifted my body onto a gurney. Driven by equal parts instinct and desperation, I followed as they loaded me into the ambulance. I floated inside, hovering anxiously over my own lifeless form. Everything was eerily quiet to me. The siren that should have been wailing was muffled as though heard underwater. The world was a blur beyond the ambulance windows. I might have been minutes or hours in that vehicle. Time felt distorted and meaningless. When they arrived at the hospital, I drifted after the gurney, through automatic doors and bright fluorescent lights. Not a single person in the bustling ER glanced my way. Nurses and doctors, colleagues I recognized, rushed forward to take my body. I heard a strangled cry from one of the nurses as she pulled back the sheet and recognized my face. It was Nina, someone I'd shared countless night shifts with. She covered her mouth, eyes glistening. "Oh no, not him," she whispered to another nurse, voice cracking. My heart would have broken at her reaction if I still had a beating heart at all. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, but I couldn't. I was utterly invisible, a ghost witnessing my own death unfold from the sidelines. As I stood there in disbelieving sorrow, something shifted in the air. I felt it before I heard it, a tug, like a gentle pull on my very being, drawing me down the hallway. At first it was subtle, like the faint scent of smoke that makes you wander toward the kitchen. Then it grew insistent. I found myself moving, almost gliding away from my body and the grieving nurses. Around a corner, past an orderly pushing an empty wheelchair and toward a curtained trauma bay in the ER. From inside that curtained area came a familiar sound, the flatline tone of a heart monitor, long and droning. Nurses scrambled around a patient on the bed while a doctor performed chest compressions. "Stay with us," he shouted, voice tense. The patient was an elderly man, his skin grey, eyes half open and glassy. He was dying, right here, right now. I realized I had unconsciously stepped right to the foot of the man's bed. No one noticed me standing amid the controlled chaos. But I felt that tug again, stronger than before, urging me forward. It was as if I could sense the fragile thread tethering the man's life to his body, and that thread was unraveling fast. I didn't understand what I was doing, only that I was compelled. My hands trembled as I reached out toward him, unsure whether I meant to help or simply drawn in like a moth to flame. As my fingers hovered above the old man's chest, the overhead light in the bay flickered once, twice, and then the world around me fell away. Time seemed to freeze as my fingers touched the air above the dying man's chest. In an instant, all the noise and movement in the emergency room halted. The doctor's shouts, the frantic beeping of machines, everything fell away into a muffled silence. I found myself gazing not at the man's failing body, but at a faint, glowing form rising up from it. It was as if a pale shadow of the elderly man were peeling free. His soul. The old man's soul hovered, flickering like a candle flame in a draught. I stared, wide-eyed and trembling. He turned toward me, eyes focusing with sudden lucidity. We stood apart from the frozen scene of doctors and nurses, in a pocket of stillness that felt outside of time. He looked at me, confusion and fear etched on his face. Am I dead?" he asked softly, his voice a gentle whisper echoing in the hush. My throat tightened. I wasn't sure how to answer. I hardly understood what was happening myself. I think so," I managed to say, my words sounding distant to my own ears. "I'm so sorry." My voice cracked with empathy. I had spent years as a paramedic comforting the dying, and even in death that instinct remained. The old man's expression wavered between relief and sorrow. "I feel light," he murmured, looking down at his now lifeless body on the bed. He saw the medical staff frozen in their desperate attempts to save him. A tear formed at the corner of his soul's eye. "My wife, I'll miss her," he said, voice trembling. "You'll see her again," I found myself saying, though I didn't know how I knew. It just felt like the right thing, the kind thing to say. I reached out, hesitant, and gently took the old man's ethereal hand in mine. He felt cool and unreal, like holding a breeze. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, trying to sound soothing despite my own uncertainty and fear. He gave a small nod. There was a distant light growing behind him, soft and beckoning. For a second I thought I saw the silhouette of a woman in that light, reaching out. The old man noticed it too, and a faint smile touched his face. "Helen," he breathed. Without thinking, I helped him turn toward that glow. Hand in hand, we stepped forward. As he moved away, his form grew fainter, drawn toward the light. I felt a warmth pass through me, a gentle sigh against my cheek as his soul slipped from my grasp and drifted onward. In the next heartbeat, the light was gone. The old man's soul vanished into whatever lay beyond. Sound rushed back in a cacophony. The doctor's voice barked, "Time of death, 2:47 a.m., and the long, flat tone of the heart monitor keened loudly. I staggered backward, nearly falling. The nurses began to clean up, faces heavy with the grief of losing a patient. But I just stood there, invisible among them, my mind reeling. I had just witnessed a soul departing. I had even guided it. And somehow I had known what to do, as if some force compelled and instructed me in that frozen moment. As the staff wheeled the old man's body away under a sheet, I remained behind, shaking. A surge of emotion welled up, sadness for the man and his wife, confusion about what I had just done, and strangely, a bittersweet hint of peace from having helped him. I wanted to believe I'd done a good thing, that I'd eased his passing. Yet as I stood in the now empty trauma bay, I realized I was not alone. Faint whispers curled around me like mist. At first I thought it was nurses talking in the distance, but these voices were softer, disembodied. Among them, I swore I heard the old man's voice, thanking someone, thanking me. Other whispers sounded less distinct, sighs, sobs, maybe even prayers, an unseen choir of the newly dead. I turned in a slow circle, heart racing, or whatever the ghost of a heart does, but I saw no one. The ER was bustling just beyond the curtain, yet here, inside this space where a life had just ended, there was an uncanny stillness that clung like a shadow. I stumbled out of the trauma bay, overwhelmed and unsteady. What was I now? I had died, but instead of moving on, I'd somehow become a guide, a collector of souls. I didn't want to think of it in those terms yet. All I knew was that a strange compulsion had made me help that man's soul, and I had done it almost on autopilot. Fear gnawed at me, but a small part of me felt pride that I'd helped ease his fear. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights above buzzed quietly. A few bulbs flickered, though no one but me seemed to notice. I wondered if it was my doing, if the energy of what had just happened still hung in the air. I drifted aimlessly through the corridor, feeling lost. I passed Nina and the other nurses who had cared for me. They were sitting now, speaking in hushed tones, likely about my death and the old man's. I wanted to reach out to them, but I knew it was pointless. Instead, I kept moving, drawn by I knew not what, hoping for answers that did not come. That night, I left the hospital in a daze, walking straight through the sliding doors into the misty early morning. The cool air didn't register on my skin. Dawn was just a pale hint on the horizon. I was dead, yet still here, left to wander with a terrible new knowledge. When someone died, I could feel it, could almost instinctively find them and guide their soul away from this world. I wasn't sure if it was a gift or a curse. All I understood was that my life was over, and something unearthly had taken hold of me. As birds began to chirp in the distance, I looked back at the hospital one last time. Inside, so many lives were carrying on, oblivious to me. I wondered if I would spend eternity walking those halls helping the dying, or worse, compelled to do so whether I wanted to or not. With a heavy heart, I turned and let the gentle tug in my core pull me elsewhere, fading like a wraith into the awakening day. In the days and weeks that followed, I wandered the earth bound by an invisible duty. Whenever death loomed near, I felt that unmistakable pull drawing me to the spot, a tug in my core I could not ignore for long. I still tried to cling to shreds of my old life at first. I watched my own funeral from the back of the church, seeing my wife and daughter sobbing in the front pew. My spirit ached to comfort them, but I was helpless. Instead, as the ceremony ended, I heard the distant whisper of another departing soul and felt myself pulled like a leaf on the wind towards someone else's tragedy. And so it went. Night after night, day after day, I found myself arriving at bedsides and crash scenes, in quiet homes and chaotic streets, anywhere a person's life was ending. I became a reluctant ferryman of souls. There was the middle-aged man who suffered a heart attack alone in his kitchen. I held his hand as he passed, even as his terrified eyes met mine. There was a young woman, the victim of a car wreck, trapped in twisted metal, much like I had been. I guided her trembling spirit out before she could see the wreckage of her own body. A little boy burned with fever in a pediatric ICU. I sang a lullaby I dimly recalled from my own childhood as I eased him into the next world. Each time I took on their final moments of pain and fear, doing what I could to calm them. I told them whatever kind words I could muster, that they weren't alone, that a better place waited for them, that their loved ones would be okay. I wasn't sure any of it was true, but it felt merciful to say. However, with each soul I collected, a piece of me seemed to slip away. I noticed it first after guiding an elderly woman who had died in her sleep. That time, I felt no flicker of sadness or sympathy as her soul thanked me, only a weary sense of obligation. I realized I was beginning to go numb. Perhaps it was a defense against the constant grief, or maybe the very nature of what I was becoming. The whispers of the dead that trailed behind me grew more numerous, but more familiar too. What once unsettled me now simply blended into the background of my existence, like crickets chirping on a summer night. I also found that human affairs started to feel distant. I no longer flinched at the sight of blood or tragedy. After all, I had witnessed so many in such a short span. I barely remember the face of the drunk teenager whose overdose I responded to, or the names of the victims of that bus crash I attended. Where once I might have mourned them, now I only saw tasks to be done. Souls to be collected before moving on to the next. It was as if a surgeon's cold detachment had settled into my very core, insulating me from the horror I waded through daily. One night I found myself in a small apartment where a young mother was being cruelly stabbed by an intruder. I arrived just as her life waned, drawn to the violence like a moth to flame. Her wide, pleading eyes locked onto mine as her soul slipped free of her bleeding body. She was frantic about her baby in the next room. In life, I would have been furious, heartbroken. I might have tried to stop the killer or save her. But as a soul collector, all I could do was gently take her hand and guide her away, muttering a hollow reassurance that her child would be safe, even though I didn't know if that was true. I felt a spark of anger as I watched the murderer flee, but it was distant, cold, impotent. The injustice of the moment only added to the weight in my chest, which I numbed by force of habit. Better not to feel too deeply. The pain was too great and too frequent. The more I did this grim work, the less human I felt. I caught glimpses of my reflection in darkened windows sometimes. I appeared dimmer, more faded, like a shadow of a man. My eyes, once bright brown, looked black and hollow. On occasion, a dying person would recoil at the sight of me. The first time it happened, I was trying to aid a little girl who was pinned under the rubble of a collapsed building. Her soul was only partially free, and she was terrified. I rushed to her, reaching out with a comforting smile I had used on so many others. But she shrieked at the sight of me and tried to push away. "No, go away," she cried. Her reaction stunned me. In that moment, I realized I must have looked horrifying to her. A gaunt, ashen figure wreathed in darkness and flickering light. I wanted to tell her I wouldn't hurt her, that I was there to help. But as her tearful eyes stared into mine, I suddenly doubted it myself. Was I truly helping? Or had I become something for the living to fear? I managed to collect the little girl's soul despite her fear. It was my duty, after all, and delivered her to that unseen beyond as gently as I could. But afterwards, I felt no tears, only an emptiness. The echo of her sobbing rejection of me rang in my head. Not long ago, that would have destroyed me with guilt. Now, I found myself simply accepting it. I was no longer the person I had been in life, and each day I felt that person drifting further away, like a fading dream at morning's light. Eventually, I stopped visiting the places and people I once loved. The pull of my old life grew weak compared to the constant call of the dying. I realized I hadn't thought about my family in weeks. When I tried to summon an image of my wife's face in my mind, it came to me blurry and distant. It hurt, or it should have hurt. Disturbingly, I mostly felt nothing. The man I had been was dissolving, replaced by the silent, shadowy being that moved from death to death with cold purpose. By the time a few months had passed, I carried dozens of souls' memories within me, yet my own memories were slipping away. I did not feel hunger or warmth or exhaustion anymore, only that insistent tug leading me from one morbid scene to the next. I found myself lingering longer in the darkness between assignments, preferring empty alleyways and graveyards to the brightly lit homes of the living. Humanity was something I observed from the outside now, like an old television show I used to enjoy but could no longer relate to. I knew then my transformation was irreversible. Piece by piece, my humanity was dying all over again, and this time there was no feeling left to mourn its loss. By the end of that first year, I was no longer a mere collector. I had become a hunter. All remnants of compassion had withered within me, where once I approached the dying with gentle words and pity, I now stalked the edges of mortal life with a cold, predatory patience. I began to see the living as little more than flickering candles that could be snuffed out with the slightest breeze. And in time, I discovered that I could provide that fatal push when I desired. The change was subtle at first. I would arrive a bit early to a scene of impending death and find myself oddly drawn to the fear in the air. Instead of easing the dying's pain, I watched it with detachment. I found myself lingering after collecting a soul, observing the grief of the living left behind, not with empathy, but with something like curiosity. Human fear had become interesting to me. Soon I started to crave it. Not the suffering exactly, but the moment of death itself. The raw electric instant when life tipped into death and a soul came free. That moment was the only time I felt anything akin to alive. It was as if their final surge of terror and release jolted me from my emptiness for one brief second, like a dark rush of adrenaline. I wanted more. I needed it. One foggy night, I found myself drawn to a small suburban house at the end of a quiet street. Inside, a lone man in his 50s sat at his kitchen table, nursing a glass of whiskey. I could smell the sorrow on him. I sensed he had been crying. The faint aura clinging to him told me his life force was weak. He was marked by fate, not long for this world. In the past, I might have gently waited nearby to guide him when the time came. But on this night, cloaked in shadow, I hungered for it to happen now. I slipped through the wall and entered his home, silent as a spectre. The man shivered suddenly, perhaps feeling the unnatural chill I carried with me. I drifted to a dark corner of the living room, watching him from the shadows. His television was on, playing some old home video. In it I glimpsed happier times, a family gathered. He was utterly alone now. He muttered something to himself and took another swig of whiskey. I leaned forward and whispered his name. It was a barely audible hiss, but I knew he heard it by the way he stiffened and looked around, puzzled. His eyes scanned the empty room, failing to find the source of the sound. I could practically taste the unease blooming inside him. A faint flicker of the lamp on his table made the man's breath catch. I whispered again, this time a little louder, letting my voice curl around the syllables like smoke. "Here," I said, the tail of the word trailing off into the ether. The man stood up unsteadily, heart drumming in his chest. "Who's there?" he called, trying to sound brave, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. Instead of answering, I let out a soft, disembodied chuckle. It resonated from the dark hallway near him. The man stumbled back, knocking over his chair. His survival instincts were kicking in now, flooding his veins with panic. I could see the vein in his neck pulsing wildly. He backed up against the wall, looking frantically from doorway to window. He felt trapped, and he was. The lamp on the table began to flicker more violently. I exerted my will upon it, making the lights dance erratically, plunging the room in and out of darkness. In the intermittent light, I allowed him glimpses of me, a tall, gaunt silhouette standing just at the edge of the next room. Each time the light blinked off, I crept a step closer without a sound. When the light returned, he saw me nearer than before. His eyes widened in terror. "What do you want?" he cried out, voice cracking. I answered him with only a low, unintelligible muttering, a chorus of whispers that emanated from every shadow in the room. The man clapped his hands over his ears, sinking to a crouch. He was whimpering now, his sanity fraying under the assault of fear. I remembered how I used to comfort people at moments like this, but that memory felt like it belonged to someone else. I felt no urge to stop. If anything, I felt a grim exhilaration. At last, I fell silent. The lights went out entirely, plunging the house into darkness. The man was breathing in quick, shallow gasps. I drifted forward until I loomed directly over him. He looked up at where he must have sensed me, eyes wide though he couldn't see in the dark. I let him feel the icy presence of my face inches from his. He trembled violently, tears leaking from his eyes. In a sudden flash of movement, I allowed myself to become visible in full. The man's gaze locked onto mine, and he saw the truth of death in my hollow eyes. He opened his mouth to scream, but before any sound escaped, his heart gave out. With a final terrified gasp, he collapsed to the floor, lifeless. For a moment, there was perfect stillness. Even the usual chorus of whispers hushed, as if holding its breath. I stood over the man's body and watched his soul peel upward, a wavering shape of dim light. There was no struggle, no words. He was beyond them. I reached out and snatched the soul out of the air, seizing it with a hunger that shocked even me. The soul fluttered in my grasp like a frightened bird, and then, with one decisive motion, I consumed it. It was over in an instant. The soul, his essence, became part of me, and a rush of cold pleasure rippled through my being. I shuddered, savouring it. In that dark, empty house, I felt powerful. I felt in control. For so long I had been a slave to death's call, a servant doing the grim work of the Reaper. But now I was death, or something close enough to it to make no difference. I did not need to wait for fate or accident to claim a life. I could reach out and take it myself. I left the man's corpse sprawled on the floor, destined to be found by neighbours in a day or two. They would assume his heart simply failed from grief or stress. No one would ever know the truth of what transpired in his final moments. No one but me. And as I slipped out into the night, satiated and remorseless, even I felt that truth slipping away like a fading dream. What remained was simply the instinct that now guided me through every moment, the hunger to claim another soul. I prowled from that night onward like a feral thing. I haunted back alleys and quiet suburbs, hospitals and highways, wherever I might find prey. Sometimes I toyed with them, drawing out their last fear as I had with the lonely man. Other times I took them swiftly, appearing at the critical second to yank their souls from their bodies like ripe fruit from a vine. Each death was a momentary thrill, a brief flash of sensation in the endless numbness of my existence. I became cold and efficient, striking almost without thought, much as I had once responded automatically to cries for help. Only now I caused the cries. In the darkness, I found my true self. Not a man, not a kindly guide, but a spectre of terror. The flickering lights, the eerie whispers, the unexplained chill in the room. These heralded my presence, and I loved the fear they inspired. I was no longer haunted by the whispers of those I'd ferried. Instead, I commanded them, wielding them to torment the living like a pack of hunting hounds. If the old me could have seen what I'd become, he would have surely wept. But that man was long gone, buried in an unmarked grave and forgotten even by me. In his place stood something inhuman and eternal, moving unseen through the world of the living. I felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of a predator at the top of the food chain. And yet, in the rare quiet moments between hunts, when I drifted through the silent void of night, I sometimes recalled the faint echo of who I used to be. It didn't manifest as guilt or sorrow. Those feelings were beyond me now. It was more like the memory of a scent from a dream or a photograph of someone I once knew well. In those instances, I would find myself wandering without aim, neither hunting nor hiding, as if searching for something I'd lost but couldn't name. But inevitably, the hunger would stir again, and a new soul's faint call would reach me on the wind, snapping me back to attention. There was always another soul to collect, another chase to savour. The hunt would resume, and any reminiscence would scatter like ashes in a storm. I embraced the monster I had become. In the quiet of a moonless night, I could almost hear the beat of my dead heart, excited by anticipation. I let the darkness cloak me like a second skin, and I listened for the next telltale whisper of mortality that would guide me to my next victim. I was patient. I could wait in the shadows as long as needed, watching and listening. The silence never bothered me anymore. It was the canvas upon which I painted my most dreadful scenes. And when the time was right, I would strike without mercy. I had become the very thing humans fear lurks under their beds or just beyond the edge of vision in a darkened hall. I was the collector of souls, once human, now a thing for which death itself held no terror, because I was that terror. In all the ages I have walked as a collector, only a rare few have ever slipped from my grasp. Occasionally, against all odds, the living snatch someone back from death after I have already arrived. Of those, one soul in particular lingers in my memory like a thorn I cannot dislodge. His name is Dr. Lucas Harper. Dr. Harper was dead for 25 minutes. I know because I was there, lurking at the threshold as his life flickered out. I felt his soul shudder loose from its mortal coil, and I moved in to claim it, brushing against the edges of his consciousness. Perhaps he even saw a glimpse of me in that interim between life and death. Many who return from the brink speak of a presence on the other side. He would not be wrong to fear me. But fate, or rather frantic doctors with defibrillators, pulled Dr. Harper back at the last possible moment. His heart started beating after 25 long minutes, yanking his soul out of my reach and back into his revived body. He escaped me that day, cheating death in a way very few ever do. Still, I remain patient. Dr. Lucas Harper walks among the living once more, telling the tale of how he was dead for 25 minutes and lived to speak of it. He might not remember what he saw on the other side, but I do. I remember the fear in his heart as he hovered at the edge of oblivion. I remember how it felt to almost close my fingers around his soul, and I remember the mark. You see, no soul slips away from me without consequence. He's been living on borrowed time ever since that night. And someday, whether in a year or in decades, his time will run out again. When that day comes, I will be there, lurking just out of sight in the corner of his eye. Dr. Harper may have cheated me once, but no one escapes the soul collector forever. I marked him long ago, and when next his flickering flame dies out, I will finally be there to collect what is mine. If you've ever wondered what waits for us after death, just hope it's not him. Because the soul collector isn't just a myth, he was once one of us, and now he's what waits in the dark when your time runs out. And if he's marked you, no amount of light or prayer will keep him away. He died a man, but came back hungry. Now he doesn't guide souls, he hunts them.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.